All right, folks, I think we're going to get started. Again, we're right about the time. We're good to have you guys, more of you guys here in person this week. I know some of you were joining online. Good to have you online folks here. Again, I think there's too many to try to do introductions and everything, but it's great to have you here, and you're always welcome to ask questions or chime in with answers and things like that. So we're looking at the week 2 handout. You should have this in front of you. You're also going to want the Shawnee booklet that I sent out the first week. I have it in booklet form, but if you had it in the PDF, it might just look like a regular page. But we're going to start up here with our week 2 lesson. And I want to start off thinking about why we have a presenter. We don't have to have a presenter, at least in terms of having someone up front waving their hand, right? In fact, in the RP churches in Ireland, most of them don't have somebody waving their hand. They have a presenter, but in the churches that I was in, they often started from their pew and just started singing, and other people would sing, or they sometimes have a choir up front. So there are other ways to do this, but we want our worship to be orderly, right? We're Presbyterian, so of course it has to be orderly, but in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 40, right after talking about worship and some of the chaos that was going on in worship in Corinth, Paul says that all things should be done decently and in order. And that's really the heart, or the reason behind having a presenter, so that we can do this together, sing together, do things in an orderly way, and you don't have the chaos of trying to sing different people starting in different keys, and I don't even know. I don't know what all would happen if we didn't have a presenter. But it's helpful to have someone to give us some order. It's also interesting, I think, to think about the Old Testament, and you may not know that there are people in the Old Testament worship who were specifically trained as singers and led the singing in temple and tabernacle worship. And so in 1 Chronicles 25, verse 7, it says, "The number of them along with their brothers who were trained in singing to the Lord, all who were skillful, was 288. So if you can imagine a 288-person choir, all trained and all skillfully singing in the temple, it's a pretty amazing thing. And then in Nehemiah 12:42, this is after the exiles have come back, it says, "And the singers sang with Jezrahiah as their leader." And so I'm not saying that the leaders and the music leaders from the Old Covenant system of worship continue in the New Covenant exactly. I'm not saying that this is an office of the church or something like that. But they needed trained singers then. We still need to have somebody trained musically who can get the congregation going and pull people along and help us keep going together. And that's what we're trying to train to do here. It is part of our worship to the Lord, and we want to do it well. We want to do it in an orderly way. So we don't have to have somebody waving his or her arm, but it really helps us sing with more unity and with more beauty. And that's why we're doing this. So if you're not sure if you want to be a presenter, that's fine, but I hope you understand why this is something that's important for our worship. All right, we are going to continue this week with trying to cover a lot of the basics of music notation, and then we're going to get into actually waving your arm to present today. So if you already know quite a bit about music, some of this will be a review, and you can save up your learning calories for when we cover the waving the arm part. But first, we want to look at those funny shapes that I've given you on the handout, a whole variety of shapes. Those are called rests. And so there's a whole bunch of different shapes you see there. There's the whole rest, a half rest, quarter rest, an eighth rest, and a 16th rest. Where have we seen those words before? Whole, half, quarter, eighth, 16th. The handout from last week, right? We looked at whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes. And those rests are just a note that tells you not to sing for just as long as a whole note, a half note, a quarter note, an eighth note, or 16th note. The good news is there aren't very many rests in the Psalter, in our Psalter, the American Psalter. So you don't really need to, this isn't a key point for being a presenter. But just if you ever come across those rests, you know what they are. A few examples I've given there of Psalms that do have rest, 68A. This is in the book of Psalms for worship. 68A, 98A, 119W, and 126A. So if you come across them, that's what those are. You'll notice there that, I gave you an example of what those rests look like in 4/4 time, and I think you can make sense of that based on last week's lesson and this week's. If you have questions about that, you can ask me later, or we can come back to that. We also talked a little bit last week about the clefs that are in our music. And this is where it might be helpful to pull out the sample sheet from the Psalter that I gave you. I think some of you just stapled to the back of your handout. This is 7b from the book of Psalms for worship. And I've tried to basically tell you what all the tiny little elements are on this page, except for the music notes themselves. And we won't cover all of that today, but notice near the top there on the left, it talks about the treble clef and the bass clef. Okay, so last week we learned that music is usually notated with these 5 lines, and in the Psalter we often have what's called a grand staff, which is where you have you have a staff up here and a staff down. You have a treble clef and a bass clef together to make a grand staff together. So you have this symbol up here, which tells you that it's the treble clef, and then you have the bass clef down here, which tells you that this is the low notes and these are the high notes. And so the notes. So I'll just put in the notes, the first notes on that page. You have this in front of you, but we've got a D and an A down there, and it's a half note, right? And then in the bass we have a D and an F sharp, and those are also half notes, okay? So in almost every psalm in the book of Psalms for worship, you're going to have 4 notes with each word, right? So this may be very familiar for some of you. There are 4 notes above and below, 2 above and 2 below each word. And the top note is the melody of the psalm we're singing, or the soprano, you call it. It's sung by the sopranos usually. So this is, you usually think of this top note as the higher ladies part. But the soprano part isn't just for ladies, it's the melody that is sung by both men and women when you just want to sing the psalm. If you're singing it by yourself, this is what you're singing. It's the top note, right? And so if you're a man and if you're male and your voice is already dropped, then you're going to sing this an octave lower. You're going to look at this note up here, but you're actually going to be singing notes down in here. It's just, you just do that naturally usually. You just sing lower than it looks. But this is the melody. So if you look at, what have I done with my page here? That top note on 7b, it goes, God is my shield, yes, he is my defense. And do you see the note go up as that top note goes up, and then it comes back down, right? Just like the melody that I just sang. And so that's the what's called the soprano part, or it's also referred to as the melody. And if you are the presenter, my general rule, and I think this is true for most presenters would say this, your job is to sing that part. Okay, so the good news is, if you are struggling with learning how to read all that music and stuff, and you think you have to learn how to read all 4 of these parts all the time, you don't. All you have to do is learn how to sing that top part, and if you learn how to sing that, then you can lead the song. And so that's what you want to pay attention to, is that top note. Now, there are these 3 other notes for each part. There's also the alto, which is a lower harmony part that's in the treble clef. And then there's the tenor, which is a higher harmony part for the men, and then a lower harmony part called bass. Those are generally sung by men. These are generally sung by women, except for when the men are singing the melody. That's not entirely true always. I like to sing alto sometimes. I have a sister who sings tenor sometimes. But generally speaking, these are men's parts or women's parts and men's parts. So that's hopefully gives you a sense of what you're looking at on the page there. We'll get into key signatures and time signatures later. So if you're looking at those on the sample sheet I've given you, don't worry, I'll explain those at some point. There's some other things that we're not going to cover in this class, like the composer and the tune name and the tune meter and stuff like that you don't really need to know to present, but I wanted to give you some of that background.
One thing I might mention on this God is my shield part, and you won't need to worry about it, but the third stave down on a righteous judge, you'll see on the bass part, there's one note, and the lines go up and down. That means that men both sing that note.
Yes. Okay, good point. Thank you, Susan. Okay, so if you look down at the third staff, where it says a righteous judge, on the word in the bass and tenor, there's only one note, right? It's an A here, and it has two lines, right? And that was not in the notes that I gave you last time, right? I said it has one line if it's a half note. But what that tells you is that both the basses and the tenors sing that note together. So again, that's not critical to know for presenting, but that's handy to know if somebody asks you, if you have the line going up and the line going down, that means both the parts sing it. So if you have that up here, for example, that means that the alto and the soprano sing that note together. So that is, thank you, Susan. That's helpful to point out.
Is on the top, he is my defense, both the soprano and the altos in the key.
Okay, yeah. So on that first line, the altos and the sopranos have the same note on the word is. So that's why you only have one note, but you have the two lines to help you remember to sing, that you're both singing that note. Are there any questions about the staff, about the parts, all four parts there, or everything that I just explained? Any questions on that? Okay. Now we get to time signatures and waving your arm. So if you have your Shawnee booklet handy, please turn to page 7. And this is right at the heart of what it means to be a presenter, at least for us American RPs. I keep saying American RPs because we actually have someone from Ireland, I think, who said they were going to join in, and someone from Australia. So this is just an international to-do here. So, but I know in Ireland they don't always wave their arms, and I don't know about Australia. Maria, do you get up and wave your arm in Australia?
It varies.
It varies. Okay. So it's helpful to know this, even if your church doesn't usually do this. But we usually think of presenting as waving your arm, right? That's what all our presenters do. That's what Robin was doing today for us. And the good news is time signatures can look a little bit complicated, but there are really only 3 patterns you have to learn. There are 2-beat measures, 3-beat measures, and 4-beat measures. Okay, so we're gonna do some. Erase this with. Oh, there's one in there. I'm sorry. I don't think the eraser's there. That's all right. We'll just be messy. It's all right. I can clean this up later. Okay, so when we talk about a measure in music, we're talking about when you have a clef like this, let's say it's a treble clef like this, okay? Eventually, you're going to see a vertical line, right? And each of those vertical lines, I'm going to continue this a little ways. And the key concept here, I know this is old hat for some of you, but the key concept here is it should take you exactly the same amount of time to get between each line as you go through the music. Every time you reach a line, it should take the same amount of time as it took to reach the previous line. I'm not explaining that very well. There's the same amount of time between each line, each vertical line, in every piece of music in the Psalter. Except there's an exception, and we'll get to that later. But the basic idea here is you need to know how long it's supposed to take between each line. And when you're beating with your arm, you're giving the congregation a sense of how long, of where you are on the music. Okay? And the idea here is that you're given a time signature at the beginning of your piece. Now, the Irish Psalter actually doesn't give you time signatures. You just have to know it, which is, right? But you have the time signature here, and it's 2 numbers. Okay, so if you look there on this Shawnee sheet, you have 4-4. 4-4 is really the most common one, I think, in the Psalter. And what that means, the top number tells you how many beats. Okay, so I'll write this down here so you can see it. Okay, the top number tells you how many beats. The bottom number tells you what note equals a beat. Okay, so a 4 means a quarter note. A 2 means a half note, and an 8 means an eighth note. So imagine for the bottom number, you want to imagine that it's the fractions. Is it the denominator? It's on the bottom. Thank you. Okay. So imagine that it's the bottom number. Imagine that it's the bottom number in a fraction. So if you see a 4 down here, that means a quarter note, 1/4. If you see an 8 down here, that means it's an eighth note, right? If you see a 2 down here, that means it is a half note, right? So 4/4 means one measure has 4 quarter notes. Okay? There's 4 beats. It takes 4 quarter notes to get to the next line, all right? So it may not all be quarter notes, but it's going to take the same amount of time. So if you have a half note here, then you could have a half note and 2 quarter notes, right? Because a half note is twice as long as 2 quarters. Or these could be, you could throw an eighth note on the end. But it always has to add up to the same number of beats between every measure. And so if you're getting to the next line and you haven't done all 4 beats yet, you've got something wrong in your rhythm. Because you need to have, it needs to take you the same amount of time to get from one line to the next. So 4/4 is 4 quarter notes per measure. 3/4 then, do 3/4 down here. Okay, so it's a terrible trouble. There we go. 3/4 would be how many quarter notes per measure? 3, right? Okay, so we have 3/4. 1, 2, 3. Okay, but that could also be a dotted whole note. There's half note. Sorry, dotted half note, or it could be, I don't know, a half note and a quarter note. But you get the idea that the beats between each vertical line always have to add up to 3 here, to 3 quarter notes. Okay, and so that's, and then you also have 2, 2, and you also have 6, 8. So let's go over how you actually help people get a sense of this beat while you're presenting. So the idea here is in every time signature, the first beat of the measure, so if this is 4/4, the first beat of the measure is called the downbeat. And you literally go down with your arm. Okay, so we're going to do 4/4 first. Okay, so you start with your hand up. Everybody put your hand up, right? And you come down first. That's the first beat. Okay, down. And then for 4/4, then you come in. Then where do you go? Out. And then up. And how many beats was that? 4. So where do you go next?
Down.
Down. In. Out. Up. Down. In. Out. Up. Right? And you see how that would help people know as you're singing, every time they see your hand come down, it should be the first note after the line. Okay? So let's go ahead and actually sing God is My Shield together. I'm a terrible presenter, and I had to bring a pitch pipe. Hold on just a second.
I have one.
I've got an app here. I'll get it. Okay, let's actually sing this, and I'm going to present. I'm going to present in 4/4, right? And watch my hand, how it's going to come down right after every vertical line, okay? So, God is my shield, yes, he is my defense, for he will surely save the right in heart. A righteous judge, God judges righteously. The wrath of God is burning every day. Okay, so did you see that? My hand was coming down right after the vertical line every time. And that's, if people know that, most people get the sense that you're trying to sort of keep a rhythm or a steady beat going for people, right? And you could just be sort of going all over the place with the arm, and it wouldn't matter to some people. But a lot of people know, in this congregation, I know a lot of people know, that the downbeat goes right after the vertical line, right, at the beginning of the measure. And that helps people know where they're at. And if they're struggling, they can know, okay, all right, now we're back at the beginning of the measure. Okay, now we're back at the beginning of a measure. And that really helps ground people and gives them a sense of where we're at in the psalm. So that's the pattern for 4/4, if you have 4 beats. Now, 3/4 down here has how many beats in a measure? 3/4? 3 beats, right? And 3 how many? 3 of which kind of notes? Quarter notes, right? So 3 quarter notes in a measure. And the pattern for 3/4, where do you always go first? Down. Okay, but there's only 3 notes this time, right? So the first, with 4, we went down, in, out, up. But what about down? So 3/4 is down, out, up, down, out, up. And Ron Patterson has some great little diagrams that show you there's a little bit of a lilt to it that's helpful. But you basically go down, then out, then up, down, out, up, down, out, up, right? Okay, so let's try, you have a couple of psalters there. Let's do 23b, the Psalm 23. It should be familiar for a lot of you. All right, this is in 3, right? I don't have it in front of me. Okay, so 23b, so 23 to Crimond is in 3.
And of course, it has a pickup.
It's true. We'll get to that later. Okay. So this has a pickup note, which means it has 1 beat before the first measure. That's why there's 1 beat before that first line, right? So let's go ahead and sing this, and you'll see how the 3 beat goes. The Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want. He makes me down to lie in pastures green. He leadeth me the quiet waters by. Okay, so you see that? It's shorter measures. It's only 3 beats per measure. But you see that first beat comes right after, that downbeat comes right after the vertical line every time. So get the idea of the downbeat really into your head. That you always want to have that first beat of the measure be coming down. Okay, 4/4, 2/4 aren't the only ones you're going to see. You're also going to see, sorry if any of you are OCD, and this is pretty terrible for the board.
Just a little something interesting. We don't need to know this, but on 23b, if you look at the last measure of 23b, it has 2 beats. The third beat of that measure is the pickup in the first measure.
Yes, so Well, I'm not going to go into that because that's who we're trying to get. I'm trying to get the basics down here. But you're right. Yes, that's correct. Yep. Okay, so let's look at 2/4. 2/4 just has 2 beats. 2 beats, and what kind of a note gets the beat? Quarter note, right? So that could be. Right? It could be 2 notes, like 2 quarter notes. It could be 4 eighth notes, but it always has to add up to 2 beats. Okay?
Don't ever select 28A.
Okay.
It's in 6/4.
Yeah, we won't even touch that right now. Okay. So 2. What did you say? What's a backwards Nike sign? The 2/4 symbol. Okay, so if you look on the page, it looks a little bit like a flipped around Nike swoosh for your 2/4 pattern. The idea here is, which way does the first beat go? Down. Always down. Always the down beat, right? But you only have 2 beats, and you need to be able to come down on the next. You need to always come down on that first beat. So the only place you have to go is up, right? So a 2 beat measure, you go down, up, down, up, down. And I usually, and Ron has this in the book, and I think this is accurate. Most people don't just go straight like this. It's not like the Braves. Oh. No, we're not Atlanta fans around here. So it's not just a straight up and down motion. It's you have a little bounce at the bottom, okay? So you sort of bounce a little bit because people need to see a beat. They need to see when your hand changes direction like that. So you go down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Can somebody find a 2? Do you have a psalter there? Somebody find a 2 beat?
Yeah, I know.
2/2. Maybe we could cover that and then we'll sing the 2/2 one. All right. Well, before we practice the 2 motion, the problem is they're not always quarter beats. They're not always quarter notes. You found one? Okay. Well, we'll come back to it in just a second. Often you'll see, if you see in 2, you'll see that it's actually in 2/2. So does anybody online want to take a stab at what? So how many beats in a measure in 2/2?
1.
You got not quite. 2, right? So 2 beats in the top. That tells you how many beats. But then how many, or what kind of a note gets the beat?
Half note.
Half note. That's correct, right? So, so what this is telling us is it's actually, this is where it gets confusing. It's actually 2 half notes that makes a measure. Which normally, if you didn't see this and you saw 2 half notes, how many beats do you think that would be? 4, right? We usually think that's 4 beats. But just to be difficult, some psalms are written giving the half note the beat. And it's supposed to communicate something about how quickly you sing it, and I'm sure there's more to it that I don't even understand. But the idea here is when you see a 2 on the bottom, that means each of these half notes is a beat. So if you see a 4/2, okay, so you see a 4/2, that would mean you need to have 4 half notes before you get a measure, right? And then you have another 4 half notes in the next one, right? So it gets to be a little bit confusing that way because you can have actually 2 whole notes in a measure, even though a whole note's supposed to be a whole measure. So I'm sorry if that's getting confusing. Keep in mind that the key idea here right now is the top number tells you how many beats in the measure. But if you see that 2, that means that the half note is the beat, not the quarter note, which gets to be a little confusing.
Then a whole note, so the whole note takes 2 beats, and quarter note takes 8 beats, 16.
I know it gets to, right. The fractions get all messed up with that. We have to learn this because there are tunes written in 2/2 or in 4/2 or 3/2. But if you can keep this in mind, this tells you how many beats. This always tells you how many beats, and this tells you what kind of note gets the beat. Okay, these 2 numbers. That's going to be the key idea to get to learn here today from these things. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
For waving patterns,
Yes.
do you just look at the top number of the time signature to figure out whether you do the Nike swoosh or the triangle or the 4/4 time?
Yes, and that is a great way to thank you. That's a better way of putting it. So, only look at the top number to figure out which pattern to do. Right? So if it is a 2, you always do the up down, the Nike swoosh, right? Okay? You always do up down for a 2. You always do the triangle for 3. That's the right triangle, I guess. And then you do, I don't know what you call the 4/4 one, but that if it ever says 4, you do the 4. So that's correct.
What about 6?
What'd you say?
What about 6?
That's what we're getting to here. This gets to be fun. Okay, let's look at 6 now. You will occasionally see 6/8, and I think somebody just said there was a 6/4. You found a 6/8?
Yeah, 70 beat.
Okay. The good news is 6/8, you actually beat like a 2. Okay, so this is confusing. If anyone ever thought the presenting was too hard, this is going to be the moment where you still think it's too hard. Okay, so you see a tune that says 6/8. Okay. All right, hold on. Let me make sure I got my minutes. Okay. All right. So we're in treble clef here. Yeah, that was terrible. Here we go. So 6. So how many beats? Normally, if you look at this, how many beats did this get in a measure?
6.
6. And which note gets the beat? An 8th note, right? So you need to have 6. And I'll explain why I'm barring them the way I am right now in just a moment. You need to have 6 8th notes to make a measure. Okay? Here's where it gets to be more confusing. The good news is you don't have to do 6 beats. There are some people who do present a 6 in 6, and I just think it's more confusing. Officially, the way you're supposed to do 6 is to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Please don't do that. I mean, if you need to, that's fine. Don't try to learn that. No, this is not the time to learn that. Okay. All right. What you actually do, a 6, this is called a compound meter. You don't need to know that. This is called a compound meter. And what that means is it's actually designed to be, you're supposed to think about it in terms of triplets, which means sets of 3 notes. And what 6/8 really is telling you is there are 2 sets of 3. And it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's that sort of lilting, almost a swung feel. It's not a swing, but it's 2 sets of 3 triplets, or 3 8th notes that you think of as triplets, as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So my rule, and if you're a presenter and you do the 6th thing, that's fine. That's your prerogative. My theory is, if it seems too long to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then you're doing it too slow. Okay? If you feel like you need to do the 6 because it doesn't feel like a beat because it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and your arm doesn't even feel like it's doing a beat, that means you're singing it too slowly. So for 6/8, you need to learn, you just use a 2. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is going to be, let's get a 6/8 psalm. 70B. Can I actually steal one of the psalters here? I didn't grab one. You guys share with Kayla.
Yeah, 34 CB is actually new.
I don't think we know 70B very well. Let's try 34C. Okay, let's do 34C. I think we've had a.
And it has a pickup note as well.
All right, we'll not get into that today. Don't worry about that. Okay. I will give us a note here. Let me think about this. Okay. Oh, sons and daughters, come, give ear and learn from me the Lord to fear. Who seeking good long life desires, or who to many days aspires. From evil make your tongue refrain, from speaking lies your lips restrain. From every wicked way depart, do good, seek peace with all your heart. Okay, so you see there that the most common pattern in that tune is actually, it's not 3/8 notes, it's a quarter note and an eighth note, right? Da, da, da. We'll just get rid of this one too. Right? And so often you see this, that's where you get that sort of swung feel. Da, 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 da. But you feel how there's really a 2 pulse, right? It's not really a pulse. I don't know that I can really feel a 6 pulse.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Like, you have to divide it up into something smaller in your head, right? I don't think I feel 6 pulses the way I feel 3 or 4. But, so you really feel it as 2 sets of 3, right? 1, 2, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the one piece of good news today is that you only have to learn these 3 patterns. How to do a 2, right? We go, let's all do a 2 together, right? We go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. We have to know how to do a 3, right? So you go 1, 2, 3. Down, out, up. Down, out, up. Down, out, up. We have to know how to do a 4, right? Down, in, out, up. Down, in, out, up. Down, in, out, up. Now, most music you listen to, most music you hear in life is going to be one of those rhythms. It's going to be one of those time signatures, one of those time signatures. It'll be in 2 or 3 or 4. And once you start to learn, if you've never learned that before, you'll start to notice it when you're listening to music. You can tell that something either has 3 beats or has 4 beats, or sometimes has 2 beats.
Especially if it has like drums or something.
Yeah, drums can really help you hear that beat if you listen to other music. So my tip to you there, or a tip at the end of that time signature and waving section on your handout says, the most important beat is the downbeat, right? When is the downbeat? Right after the line, right? It's the first beat of the measure every single time. So if you get lost, which is going to happen to you, even after you've been presenting for ages and ages, you're still going to get lost sometimes. The best way to get back on track is to look for the next line, the next measure starting, and get that downbeat again. So you could be off by a few beats, and you just look on your page and say, okay, I know this word is on the first note after the measure line, so I'm going to do a downbeat again when I get to that line. Okay, so that's something to keep in your head, is that downbeat is that first note in the measure. And if you can keep that, you can always come back to that if everything else falls apart. Okay, I have thrown a lot at you today, and we're going to come back and review a lot of these things a lot. And so I wanted to get a lot of this content before you early, and we're going to keep going over it again and again. But to practice this week, I would encourage you to listen to music. While you're listening to music, try to figure out if it's in 2, 3, or 4, and wave along with it. Okay, so you could be listening to music in the car, you could be listening in your headphones, or whatever it is. It could be the radio, it could be all kinds of styles of music, and most of that music is going to be in 2, 3, or 4, and 4 is going to be the most common. Most pop music today is in 4. A lot of music is in 4 beats. But listen to music and just try to get that into your head, this feeling of 3, feeling of 4, the feeling of 2. And just try waving along with it. I'd also encourage you to pick a psalm that you know really well and sing it by yourself several times. It's one that you just know really well, that you don't even have to think about the words. You can just sing it. And sing it several times. Let's say maybe 3 times before next time. Sing it by yourself and wave along with it. See if you can look at the page and figure out when you're supposed to be doing the downbeat, and if you're supposed to be doing a 3 or a 4 or a 2. So that's what I want you to do for practice this week. A couple of random tips for the week. When you're learning these motions, I would encourage you to practice in front of a mirror a few times, because your arm may not be doing what you think it is doing. I had been presenting for years, and Vicki Smith, the presenter at Covenant Fellowship in Pittsburgh, said, it's supposed to be a downbeat. And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, your downbeat doesn't come down, it goes to the side. And I said, what? No, it doesn't. And I had no idea that what my arm was actually doing. And I was kind of doing this like slanty thing. And it was kind of confusing because it didn't look like it was a downbeat. And so your arm may not be doing exactly what you think it is. And it's helpful to look in the mirror and just to see what you're doing. I've mentioned this a little bit, but if you lose your place in the beat pattern, if you're going along and you realize, I don't know where I am and I'm trying to figure out where I am on the page, while you're figuring out what you're doing, just start doing an up-down pattern until you find your spot, and then go back into whatever it is you were supposed to be doing.
Or just watch me sometimes because I get so lost. I'm like, where am I? Okay, here I am.
Right. So, but when in doubt, I would just encourage you, don't give up. Don't just drop your hand. You can if you have to, but just keep doing it up-down until you figure out where you're at, and then keep doing the pattern you're supposed to be doing. So that's just a little tip for you this week. That's the content I wanted to cover this week, but I've thrown a lot at you. What questions do you have about time signatures and what those numbers mean, and about beats in a measure, and about those waving patterns? Any questions this week?
I actually have a question.
Yes.
Well, it's kind of more of a comment. The way that I don't know, I've watched some people who do the waving so that the downbeat is actually goes up instead of going down. I don't know if you've seen that anywhere, but that's kind of how I learned it.
Okay.
And I didn't really know that a lot of people were like, okay, well, it has to be down. And so I have a different 4/4 waving pattern.
Okay.
It starts in an up.
So where do you go after you go up then?
Well, you go up, then down, then out, then in, and then back up.
Up, down, out, in. Up, down, out, and in.
I
Okay.
don't know. It's
Sure.
I guess it's kind of unusual now that I've like seen the common way.
Sure.
But
And that's fine. So that's the thing. These are just conventions. So it's not like there is, an international board of well, actually, I'm sure there are music authorities that have opinions about these things, but there's no, international presenting standard that says you must do it this way.
that's true.
But generally speaking,
The three, 4, and the 2 are very similar. It just, I guess, the mindset I've had behind it is that it's easier for my congregation to see going up.
right.
Because I have to go up before I can come down, and so sometimes we get a false start, right?
Right. Okay. So one thing to think. So, and that's great. If that's working for you, I'm not here to tell you have to do it this way.
Yeah, I was just interested to see that there is a different way of doing
Sure. So one thing to think about, one of the reasons I find it helpful to do the downbeat the way it is that there is, I'll tell you here next time, I think, that I suggest that you do one beat before people are supposed to sing. And so you do, if you want people to start on the downbeat together, they need to see an up before the downbeat. So that's the way that I've been taught, and the way I think it can give people an indication. So you go up and everybody's ready, and then you come in together like this. If it's starting on an upbeat, if you have a pickup note, which we didn't cover this time very well, but if you have one of these times where there's one beat before the measure, it helps that's, so like in 23B, the Lord's my shepherd. So that first note is actually on the upbeat, right? So you go, the Lord's my shepherd. So again, this is just what's normally done so some of you guys are in band and in choir and stuff like that. You guys, it's the person's conducting you, it's a downbeat is the first beat, right? So that's pretty standard for most musical contexts, is the downbeat is the first beat. If you have another way of doing it and the congregation understands it, and that's great, that's no problem. But this is kind of the standard way to do it. So, any other questions? Sam?
Do you always, like, when the 8th note gets the beat, do you always bar it? Does that make sense?
Right, so that's a good question. I'm trying to think if there are any other 8ths in the Psalter besides 6/8. I think it's only 6/8 that is is the eighth notes. I think 6/8 is the only key signature in the Psalter that has an 8 on the bottom.
Okay.
So that's the only one you have to worry about. So yes, so in this case, it's not a general rule that it's always with eighth. They're always barred like that. But anytime it's a multiple of 3, that's confusing. So in high school, we sang a song that was in 12/8. But really what that was 4 beats. But each of them has 3 little beats in it. So it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there are other pieces you do like. It's not in the Psalter. You don't need to worry about that for singing.
Is it barred more often than the half or quarter notes or less?
So you mean like grouped into 3s like that?
Right,
Yeah, so the eighth notes are more often, yes. If you have one of those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kind of things, it's usually eighth notes that they do that with. If that makes sense. There is a 6/4 in the Psalter. So that's actually, they're not barred, but 6/4 would be 6 quarter notes like that, but you still think of them in 2 groups of 3.
Yeah, because quarter notes aren't barred, right?
Right, because you can't put because bars mean it's an eighth note. So you can't bar them together, but you still think of them in sets of 3. So if you see 6, it means 2 sets of 3. The good news is the Psalter is a little simpler than a lot of music, and so you can have some rules like that. You just say if you see 6, you know it's 2 sets of 3. Yes,
So
I mean.
would you do a 3 or 2 pattern for that?
That would be a 2 pattern. Anytime you see 6, you do a 2 pattern.
You could do 2.
You could do 3, but then you've got a downbeat twice in a measure. So there's a reasoning behind it. You wanna keep it in 2, because if you did it in 2 sets of 3 like this, you'd have a downbeat right in the middle of the measure, and then
It's basically 3.
then the 2 people who are paying attention to the downbeats are going to be thrown off, and everybody else will be fine. Okay. Any other questions?
What do you do if it changes key signature partway through the song?
Okay, so this is true. It does happen. This is one of those exceptions. Sometimes you're singing along and you have it in, we'll do it up here. So let's say it's a 6/4, and then all of a sudden in the middle of the music, it goes like this.
Oh, wait, never mind.
This is a bad example because you almost never switch from 6/8 to something else.
On Psalm 80, you have the 3/2, you have a measure of 2/2, and then you got back 3/2.
I'm going to turn this into 3/4, and this will work better. Okay. All right, so this is 3/4, so there's 3 beats, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Then you see it says 4/4, and you know the next measure is going to have 4 beats. Which it will have, however many notes are over here, there are 4 beats. And what you have to do is change patterns in the middle of your singing. This is one of the harder things to do in precenting. This is something that catches everybody off guard, and it only happens in a few psalms. But what you do is you're doing 3/4 like this, and then you see the measure come that says 4/4, and you have to know right away to come inside that time and do 4. And then if it switches back, then you go back to 3. Okay? So you have to switch your pattern in the middle of it, and that can be kind of confusing sometimes.
I don't think there's anywhere in the blue Psalter that it switches from 6 to something else or something else to 6. I don't think there are any switches.
I think you're right.
The Red Book's kind of wacky that way and has a couple, but
Okay. You may be right. It may be in the Red Book. The Blue Book, there are some switches between 3 and 4, and maybe 2, and I think there's some measures of 2 in there. But you do have to switch your pattern when you see the number. So your goal should be to get to where you just see the top number and you know how many beats to do that measure. And that's what helps you do it. Any other questions? Okay, we're going to review this stuff. This is a lot today, and I've gone over time, but that's the basics of waving, and do practice this week. Practice along with any music you're listening to. My wife laughs at me sometimes when I'm just listening to any kind of music and I'm over there presenting along with it, just because I like to think about how many beats there are and stuff like that. If you have questions, if any of you online have questions during the week and you want to shoot me an email, you're welcome to as well. But I think that's all we're going to cover today. So thanks, everybody.